Thank you very much. I'd like to begin with a witness and then say a bit more about Pierre Chanel, and then we might come to the attitudes and his way of preaching and doing. So the first would be a witness of one of the, among the Benedictines at least, best known people. It's their abbot primate, Notker Wolf, a Benedictine father. He writes, "I was just 14-year-old and a zealous altar server at Mass. People said this boy should become priest. I wasn't searching for the meaning of life, yet I was at a thoughtful age. One day I found a small booklet in the attic. It was a biography of a certain Peter Chanel, a missionary in the South Seas during the 19th century. I read and was fascinated. Chanel had landed on Futuna, an island in the Pacific Ocean, but he had not been made welcome. The king had allowed him to care for the sick and the dying, and then after several months, he had been assassinated. But that wasn't the end of the story. 1 or 2 years later, his confreres arrived on that island without suspecting anything. And then something happened that, in my opinion, was astonishing. Not only were the confreres warmly welcomed, but the islanders asked them for baptism. Because at the moment on Peter Chanel's death, they had immediately understood what he had been trying to tell them. Subsequently, the whole island was baptized. I put the booklet on one side and said to myself, that's it. Life does have a meaning. There's work for you to be done. You're going to be a missionary. As I said already, I was not searching for a meaning in life, not at all. From time to time, I would ask myself what I would become, for I was often ill and sometimes had to stay in bed for 3 or 4 months a year. Now I knew what I wanted to become, a missionary like Peter Chanel. And I understood more. I shouldn't count on success in the short term. I convinced myself of that and have never forgotten it. And throughout my life, this has given me an extraordinary freedom in my work. You can't force success. Whether it happens in your lifetime or not, it is God who offers it. I have always told myself, and I still say it today, if your work doesn't get results, even if you have to blame yourself for it, God will provide the success, and you can put your mind to rest. I am very fond of this Notker Wolf, the abbot primate of all the 800 Benedictine monasteries, because he is that kind of very decided missionary work. I will try now to say a bit more about Chanel. He was from France, the east of France, from the Bresse area, Bourg-en-Bresse. And he learned his school, you could say, from the parish priest to whom he went. And he was very, very industrious. But one day, he was, at a certain age you probably become, fed up with it. And one of his institutrices of the teachers saw him near the church and said, "What's happening?" And he said, Ralbol, I'm fed up with all this. And she told him, asked him, have you spoken with your mother, Mary? And he went back into church. And after a while he came out and decided to carry on. A very important moment in his life. Later on he became a Marist father, and as the Marists at that time were asked to go to east, west, Pacific, with all these thousands of isles, and they took it on. He was one of the first to make profession, because at that time they got the approval of the Pope that the Marist, a young community in those days, were approved by Rome and were an international and congregation. So he was one of the first to make profession, and he volunteered the same year, 1836, to be in the first mission band to Oceania. And they left on Christmas Eve, not easy. And with the prospectus that they would never come home. It was a very, very difficult and long journey. Just imagine, 11 months to go to the final island, Futuna, where he landed with a brother, Marie Nizier. I cut this short because there's much to be said. But there they were now, on the island, far away from home. They didn't know the language, the food, the crops, the weather, the community living, what you have to do, what you don't do, the culture, the religion, the taboos, the laws of the community, their gods, the moral life. Nothing was known to them. A mountain of uncertainties. Peter learned the hard lesson of adaptation and learned to sustain himself with what the natives ate, living fish. Sometimes I hesitate to tell you, but that's what they ate. Small fish, still living, or larvae the size of silkworms. One of the first prerequisites was to study and learn the language. And when I say language, I don't mean just the language, the written or spoken language, the language of somebody who has his own mind frame and all that, his own culture. It's all part of the language. But he said he started to learn that. It was very difficult, as you can imagine. Think of Cyril and Methodius. They couldn't read nor write. They didn't know one single word. How do you do that? You learn one word, finally, probably with the right connotations, another word, and 100 words perhaps. But how do you use them? The grammar, how is it? And so on. It's a very difficult and long-lasting process. It seemed to be a hopeless undertaking. Without a dictionary and grammar, the missionaries had to be observant. Yeah, they were challenged to listen. Peter Chanel were a good listener. The Mare spirituality is listen. Mary as a model of following Christ. So Mary was an expert in listening, as St. Luke says. He listened sympathetically to their problems. He would invite them to live in peace and harmony. He cared for the sick, consoling the elderly and the dying. He was even able to baptize, but only those who were dying. As time went on, the popularity of Father Chanel began to cause the king some concerns, and he felt that his authority and his prestige were being undermined. However, it's true, Neoliki, the king, Neoliki would never have dared to kill Peter Chanel himself, because this man had always been good to him. And then there was a special situation on that island. There were two factions, and they got into war from time to time. And there was a terrible war that broke out in 1839, resulting in the death of the king Vanae of the contrary to Neoliki. As soon as Peter Chanel received news about the defeat, about the war, he ran to the battlefield, giving what help he could give to the wounded. He baptized dying people as far as he could. Neoliki attributed his victory to the protection of his gods and returned to paganism. He declared war against the new religion, which in his eyes would have him supplanted. And towards the end of 1840, the missionaries began to experience a time of persecution. The king cut off all contact with them. He wanted to pack them off on the next ship passing by. The situation grew worse, and when Maitala, the king's eldest son, was converted, in his rage, Neoliki, after an angry outburst against his son, assembled all his close relatives, told them about the situation, and asked for their opinion about what he should do. Exterminate the new religion and kill the priest, was the answer. And the king made it quite clear that he was in agreement with them, and he entrusted it to Musu, his son-in-law. And on April 27, in 1841, when night had fallen, Musu called together a group of friends, and they had to swear that they would beat the foreign priest to death. They all agreed to this, except Louis, who was remaining sitting on the ground. He protested against it as he feared the revenge of the white. And when the sun then began to rise in the morning of the 28th of April, Marie Nizier had gone, the brother had gone to visit villages, leaving Peter Chanel alone. About 7 o'clock in the morning, after his meditation and prayers, Chanel went into the garden. Then out of the blue, Musu, this son-in-law of Neoliki, appeared along with two companions, and the missionary asked him, "What is it? What do you want?" "I injured myself whilst cutting down trees and have come for your help." "Wait a minute, I'll go and get some medicine." And while Peter Chanel was looking for medicine, the intruders rushed into the hut and set about pillaging the place. One of the murderers beat Peter with a club, dealing blows on his arms and on his temple. He fell down. Peter Chanel, but he didn't complain. He muttered just, Malai Fuai, Malai Fuai, I'm happy to die. Meanwhile, the pillage continued, and they stole linen and holy objects, and they even smashed the little organ. In his anger, Musu Musu cried out, "Have you only come here to steal? Beat the priest to death." Nobody heard him, so he reached out for an axe that belonged to Chanel himself and hit him over the head, and with such a force that he hardly could remove it. Shortly after his death, the women went into the martyr's hut. They washed the blood-soaked body, embalmed it with coconut oil, and wrapped it in 3 pieces of local cloth. Towards midday, Musu Musu arrived, accompanied by the king, and he dug a hole and buried the missionary there, convinced that he effaced his memory forever, that everything was over and done with. But on the contrary, everything was just about to begin. The word sown by Peter Chanel soon began to bear fruit. In 1842, other missionaries arrived at Fortuna, and in 1843, a small church was built above the place where he was martyred. By 1844, all the inhabitants of Fortuna had become Christians. Musu Musu himself requested that after his death, he might be buried beside the tomb of the martyr. His request was granted. The words of the gospel came true. I tell you most solemnly, unless a grain of wheat falls on the ground and dies, it remains only a single grain. But if it dies, it yields a rich harvest. Father Karl Rahner, most of those who think of Vatican II as a German theologian who was very important at that stage, called Saint Peter Chanel the saint of failure, the saint of unsuccessfulness. We could ask ourselves, what is his secret? What was his secret? Because very often, when they were persecuted and the whole atmosphere around them became a bit hostile, then Brother Nizier would say, "Let's go. I heard they want to kill you." And he said, "No, we just do our work as it is." And it was very routine work, because they weren't very good at explaining themselves with the languages and all. But the way they lived their Mara spirituality, their kindness, their simplicity, their audacity, their perseverance, the way they were dealing with the old ones, with the sick ones, the way they were listening to them, that was what it was all about. That's why they called him the man with a good heart. Personally, I recently had some sudden insight, late, but only now. Insight, I was sent to London, to the West End. Peter Chanel was sent to an area where no knowledge of Christianity was. Just make them Christians. How do you do that? What an audacity. I was sent to London, West End, make them Christian. God. You know, and we are here, all of you with us. We are sent because we are baptized. We are sent to let the others know the good news. And it's only 2-3 days ago when the gospel said, go, do it, take no sandals, just go and tell them. In that sense, the urgency was there. And I often ask myself, why is he saying it's so urgent? Because there's so much healing necessary. People can make a big show of themselves, but that isn't always the case. Those who have the profession of listening to others know perfectly well that everybody has this little thing there which is nagging. When you think, they have all the best of the world, not at all. Yes, perhaps money and all that. But here, there's sometimes a lot of wounds, and very often. All of us have somehow this kind of being wounded and not wanting to show it. We become like nuts sometimes, not, I don't think of that, but very hard outside because the core is so soft. It's good to remember that if people do as if nothing can disturb me, there is something others behind it. And listening to that and having compassion, that is, to me, a very important point. Because maybe we can talk about that. There is, in the right personal communication, a lot of good things. And when we know it, when we have learned more of it, we find suddenly Jesus is constantly referring to that, to good listening. The parable of the sower. It's not just taking it up. Some fell on good ground, and they got it. And he says, take care that you listen well. Because the one who has will be given more. We only seem to know this from the talents. But it's written there as well in Luke 8:18a. And the one who thinks he has it, from him it will be taken. I was very struck when I looked at some of the, these pictures that you have on tube maps, like this one. What struck me, it's a very funny thing. You could think, Victoria doesn't say it. It's a pride. Or up here, Pancras, I believe, joy, whatever. But Leicester Square, where we are, compassion. Thank you.